Welcome to Fit to Speak from the Archives. I'm Eugene Obah, glad as ever to be with you. 2 years ago, we talked about cancel culture, and in the time since, not much has changed. When you think about all the reasons why in recent times certain segments of our populace spend so much energy talking about the MLB, Potato Head, Coke, and all kinds of other things, it all starts to begin to make sense. Oh, I guess now we should add M&Ms to that list. Anyway, I talked with journalist and media entrepreneur Marcus Dowling, conservative commentator Taylor Maupin, and Common Sense Entertainment creative director Raheem Dawodu Jr. So let's begin the second edition of Fit to Speak from the Archives with a look back at the first part of that episode. Hello and welcome to Fit to Speak. I'm Eugene Obah. So glad to have you with us. I've got two words for you: cancel culture. Let's see what Merriam-Webster's got to say about it. They say to cancel someone, usually a celebrity or other well-known figure, means to stop giving support to that person. The act of canceling could entail boycotting an actor's movies or no longer reading or promoting a writer's works. The reason for cancellation can vary, but it usually is due to the person in question having expressed an objectionable opinion or having conducted themselves in a way that is unacceptable, so that continuing to patronize that person's work leaves a bitter taste. Man, there's a lot of stuff that we need to get to here to unpack all of this. So without further ado, let's not waste any time and let's get right to our panel. And joining me now is Taylor Maupin, conservative commentator, Marcus Dowling, journalist, entrepreneur, and cultural creative, and Raheem Dawodu Jr., the creative director of Common Sense Entertainment. Guys, welcome. So nice to have you all with me, and let's go ahead and get started here. So, Marcus, I want to begin with you, okay?
Yes.
So, in thinking about the discussion tonight and the origins of cancel culture and everything else, I was looking at a few articles here, and it seemed tough to kind of find the origins of where and when the cancel culture really started. And I was looking at some of this stuff here. You're talking about Black Twitter, according to Fox, and Merriam-Webster, that sort of thing, back in 2015, 2016, 2017. But then it goes further back, apparently, like 1991's New Jack City movie, talking about Lil Wayne's song, I'm Single, back in 2010, which references that movie in 1991. And there was a 2014 episode of VH1's Love and Hip Hop, which also referenced cancel culture.
Absolutely is.
With all of this and what's been going on, is this all kind of sort of correct here? Does this kind of paint an accurate picture of how this stuff kind of sort of started?
Absolutely. So if you look at Twitter as a idea more so than as a physical or virtual space, Twitter is a community of people who, for the most part, on the cool side, the cultural cool side of it, all kind of have the same cultural touchstones. So that goes back through Love and Hip Hop, which is the first generation of it, which then goes back to Lil Wayne, which is the next generation of it, which then goes back to New Jack City, which is the generation after that. So if you look at all of those cultural touchstones that impact upon millennial to post-millennial culture, that allows for the moment to exist when a cancellation needs to occur, and across the board, everybody knows exactly what that means. They understand because of the cultural spaces in which these people interacted before Twitter even existed, that they all kind of have the same background and spaces where they can look to something and say, that's a term that we all understand and we know exactly what it does. So that is largely correct. I think that the thing about cancel culture that's intriguing is that Twitter was a lawless land in the era before, say, 2012, 2013. Twitter was kind of an open source, free form, conversational space. But in the post-Trump era, when Trump decides to run for president, 2015, you end up with this situation where reality becomes skewed and facts become skewed, and for largely left-wing leaning social media. They need to create a space that allows for them to develop facts and develop truth. And in doing that, that's where cancellation comes in as a way to balance, or rather imbalance, social media on the side of liberal thinking people.
Yeah, and I think that Twitter, and we're going to get to a lot of stuff about Twitter because there has been
Right, of
so
course.
much stuff going on with that platform and what it entails. There has been a lot of material that has been going on, especially in recent times. And one of the ones that I would like to get to tonight is Barry Weiss's, actually, before I even get to Barry Weiss's letter, I want to first talk about the Harper's letter that was published recently, and there were a lot of things going on with that. So I want to read actually some of that in part, which decries cancel culture. It's stating, quote, the restriction of debate, whether by a repressive government or an intolerant society, invariably hurts those who lack power and makes everyone less capable of democratic participation. The way to defeat bad ideas is by exposure, argument, and persuasion, not by trying to silence or wish them away. And then the letter goes on to say that we need to preserve the possibility of good faith disagreement without dire professional consequences. Now, interestingly, as I mentioned, the letter has had a lot of very well-known signatories, Barry Weiss among them, Noam Chomsky, Fareed Zakaria, and countless others. So, and then of course Barry Weiss, she had her own resignation letter, which was quite lengthy at that, and as I said, we'll get to that later on in the program. But my question, let me go to Taylor here on this. Um, can we have good faith disagreements? Can we have that that kind of stuff on so many of these issues, or has that become a lost art form?
That good faith disagreement is getting harder and harder to find. And it is originally the foundation of any democracy or organization to function. It has to have a way to communicate effectively when people completely disagree with each other, though maybe they have the same ambition to improve the same issue that they see in society or what have you at large. Um, these mobs are a sort of kangaroo court, a vigilante kangaroo court, if you will, of people acting as judge, jury, and executioner when it comes to the reputation of whoever their target is that they're canceling, even if it's a very old tweet that's 10 years old that's out of context or unfunny or didn't receive much traction when it first was tweeted out into the world at all. Is just like something to be a part of, some movement, some new outrage to be a part of. So that good faith disagreement on the internet is a lot easier to not have because of the impersonality of the little blurb that you're reading on their social media. But in person and in a podcast conversation format, that discussion is much more easy to have and much more common, and one that needs to be had more and more and more, as I see it.
And what about that, Raheem? What do you make of those comments there? And think about it. It's like we're seeing just so many things go on where it's like everybody's debating all sorts of stuff. Can we still have those kind of conversations without that reprisal?
I mean, yes, you can. You just got to be able to get people have to have these conversations in good faith. That's the issue. Is a lot of times, and I know Marcus mentioned earlier the left Twitter sphere, but sometimes I often see on the right with a lot of like people on these pundit shows, they're having bad faith arguments, and then they're upset that uh, people are saying something against something that was a bad faith argument to jump. And you can't have these conversations if people aren't coming in with good intentions. And that's just been a problem with cancel culture on both sides. depending on whatever your viewpoint is. But really, like, you have to have like good intentions when you come into the conversation. You have to be able to say, all right, I want to listen to what you're saying, and I'm going to not take your words personally as an attack against me because you said this. That's what I've seen as like the drawback from this. That's what I've seen as the failure. But you just you have to have good faith in these conversations. And for many years in academia, people have had good faith conversations. Even like a lot of like political leaders, social leaders, they've had disagreements, but it's been in good faith. It's not personal, and I think that's the issue, is that people take these things very personal and take more from these words than and not like was mentioned earlier, is not seeing the humanity in the person that's saying these words. And it's just come in with good faith and try not to. It's hard, I know, but try not to get too hurt with what's being said.
There was an incident where Natasha Tynes, she took a picture of a Metro employee who was eating on the job. And as we know, with Metro's rules, laws, what have you, eating or drinking on the train, or any of the stations for that matter, is against the law. And so she took that picture and she tagged Unsuck DC Metro, a very well-known blogger. He did a lot of blogging back in the 10 years ago, about 10 years ago. He's much more active on Twitter these days, very well known. And it was an interesting stuff for me because the publisher, now her publisher, apparently during that period, the whole hullabaloo that went on the Twitter sphere, they canceled the book deal, apparently, although most recently her publisher was like, wait a minute, we did publish your book under a threat of a lawsuit by you. Now, we did actually invite Natasha to take part in the program, but we did not hear back. But the hullabaloo that went on with that, I just thought personally, I don't know how you guys felt about seeing that, especially our two DC folks over here. I don't know how you guys felt about it, but to me, when I saw that and the outrage perpetuated on Twitter, I was like, forget about this book deal or whatever else. I just did not think it deserved that level of controversy and outrage, because here we are, here's somebody who's flouting the rules and all that of Metro, and it's just showing the hypocrisy of it. That's just how I felt about it. To me, there was one article from DCist that was aimed at Unsuck DC Metro, and then there was an article from the Washingtonian, and I just thought it was a little crazy to me. Taylor, I know you're out in the West Coast, but what does that say about the media in general? Because I just thought that the energy that was spent covering this and covering Unsuck DC Metro and all of this kind of stuff could have been better spent covering a lot of more important issues, I thought. What do you think?
Well, the media is in a different place now than it was 30 years ago, even 20 years ago. The way it generates revenue is changed, especially with the proliferation of social media and citizen journalists. So, yeah, the articles written about Natasha's case were just anything but journalism. It was basically, it felt like I was reading something from the people a part of the Twitter mob that were piling on her, even long after she had deleted the tweet that she that was controversial in the first place. There was no like, oh well, we interviewed Natasha and here's what she had to say. There was no balance whatsoever. It was just like, yes, there was an outrage mob, and that is absolutely correct. I'm joining the outrage mob myself, and I would implore you, reader, to join with me. There's got to be something else we can do. I don't have the answer right now, but this is a bit much, how much people's lives can be affected by this. Like, there is a reason why isolation in prison is so controversial, because the same area of the brain that processes physical pain processes like, the pain of social isolation. You'll have to speak with someone more qualified than myself about the specifics of that. But this is very serious for people. People's have committed suicide because of outrage mobs. They've lost their jobs because of outrage mobs. And outrage mobs that are completely outraged at not something that was intended or even done by the person that is the target of the outrage. It is everyone out looking for the boogeyman, for some villain, for some kind of like cartoon straw man bad guy that they can say, ha ha, there he is or she is. Let's get them. Let's all pile on and get them, instead of giving that person a fair hearing, which is actually a legal requirement under our law here. Like you're innocent until proven guilty. Like, this is not the military court where you're guilty until proven innocent. But at least in the military court, there's a path to prove your innocence, whereas in the public outrage Twitter mob court, you're guilty until proven guilty, and you're still guilty no matter what. Shut up, you're guilty.
And here's the other thing for me, at least, and maybe Raheem, you can jump in on this. I don't know, man. I just think that so much of what we see from a lot of the mainstream outlets, so basically Washington Post and some of these other stuff, is just stenography. If you see some of the Metro coverage that is going on in some of those papers, I mean, some of it's good, don't get me wrong, but a lot of this stuff is nothing more than stenography and not asking the real true questions about the dysfunctionality of the system. So I'm kind of like, how do we square this circle here?
I mean, shoot, like you brought up what I was going to say. Like there are real problems with DC Metro, over WMATA in general. Like there's a lot of problems with the system. There needs to be greater accountability. Whereas when he's going, there's also needs to be a question of like of these different jurisdictions that don't want to spend money on Metro. I know there was I remember a couple of years ago there was a debate in Virginia because of they didn't want to put more money into improvement projects in WMATA because they're like, well, a lot of our state aren't using Metro, and Richmond's a whole other metro area 2 hours away from DC. Same thing happening with in Maryland. They're having the conversations as well about like not wanting to fund WMATA the way they should, even though large swaths of their states use it. Their capitals are in two different parts of the state that aren't interacting with the metro at all. And so these are questions that need to be had. There also needs to be questions of where the money's going. I haven't seen any expose about that ever really about metro in DC. It's very easy to like touch on surface level stuff. And this is the problem with media in general, in mainstream media, is that it's very easy to like touch on the very surface issues that we can revolve around. So it's easy to have a conversation around cancel culture, and should she have eaten on the train, and should she have lost her book deal for doing that? Should she have taken a picture of her eating on the train, which is also a question to be had as well. Like that's kind of a little bit weird to me, but the bigger questions surrounding like the issues that are taking place in the metro, they aren't being touched on, and they can say at the end of the year, well, we did our metro expose on Unsuck Metro and this story around Natasha Tynes and this metro employee, but not like, hey, why did it take 20 years for metro? Why did it take 20 years and for the Fort Totten mass train crash that happened for Metro to finally do something about the trains? And why is Metro having to shut down lines at a time to do repairs on their trains, and so forth? Like there are so many questions that need to be asked in Metro that is never asked in Metro. Why are employees able to like scheme in overtime hours so much, or why is that even an issue? Like these are questions that need to be asked about Metro that aren't ever asked about Metro, and our media outlets in the DC area aren't asking those questions because it's easier to focus on Natasha Tynes taking a picture of a Metro employee eating and dropping over that. And I actually kind of don't think she should have done that. I think that's kind of like weird to me for her to do that. But at the same time, it was like, well, it was weird for her to do that, but I don't really care. And I didn't want to see her lose her book deal over it. I didn't care that
Right.
much over this issue.
I mean, and to me, it's a pity. And there's the whole hullabaloo whether the book was really published or not, blah blah blah. But really, in any event, nobody should lose their deal because of that. Now, would I be taking pictures of people eating or drinking? Not necessarily. No, I wouldn't do that. Um, but I think what this stuff really speaks to, folks, is that I think Unsuck DC Metro has really built a better mousetrap than a lot of the local media in terms of shining a light in terms of the questions that you address, Raheem. And I think these are questions that should be regularly addressed by the media. Now, most recently, there was a picture going around of two Metro employees not wearing masks in the system when this stuff is required. And we're still in the pandemic. So, to me, and this is kind of touches on some of the stuff that I think about when it comes to also some of the foreign outlets as well, is that like some of the foreign outlets, Unsuck has built a better mousetrap, and I think there's just a lot of jealousy, in my view, in terms of being kind of sort of outscooped and actually doing the kind of journalism that should be done, but for whatever reason, they aren't doing the kind of journalism that really, matters to a lot of people. So I think, the kind of stuff I'm seeing out there is just a shame. And I think that people like Unsuck should be applauded, in my opinion, for this kind of stuff. And
I wouldn't go
really,
that far though, Eugene. I honestly wouldn't. I wouldn't say that about Unsuck Metro. Like I think they have a lot of problematic stuff as well. Honestly, like they do tend to target like a lot of like low income people on a train, like on what they do on the trains. They do tend to like and a lot. And I don't know, like they like I see what you're saying. I agree that they cover issues about Metro that need to be like tapped into, but they also kind of like touch on stuff that is like, well, this is a big city and this is kind of how things are sometimes. You gotta deal with these things. And I feel like that sometimes they write from the standpoint, they share stuff from the standpoint of like, oh my gosh, like, I didn't know that like cities are like this for the public transit system. Like you can go to New York and see the same stuff, and be, and also be grateful that we even have something. Because if you go like to LA or some other metropolitan cities, they don't even have like a very robust public transit system as we do here. So I'm not saying, my whole point really is like, we gotta kind of like you gotta kind of like have like step back a little bit and say like they've done good things, but also they've also had their issues as well. And they deserve criticism as well. So that's kind of where I would like stand on. I wouldn't applaud them all the way on some stuff they do.
I mean, nobody's above criticism. Certainly not even, any of these outlets. Nobody's above criticism here. I think the larger thing, that I kind of sort of look at is who is actually doing the kind of coverage that we need to be seeing from the Washington Post, DCS and some of the others. We need to be seeing this kind of stuff. Now, yes, certainly there may be some issues about, tone and tone and some of the stuff, the way that I guess the message is delivered, and the issues going on there. But I think that when I look at this stuff, I'm not saying Washington Post do this stuff. I'm not saying, these guys, a lot of these guys do anything. Before we go, I made mention about some media outlets building a better mousetrap. And what I meant by that at the time was that you had some foreign media outlets, a lot of consternation about some foreign media outlets like Al Jazeera, particularly during and into the run-up to the Iraq War. And more recent years, RT America, which closed up shop earlier this year in the United States. As I've disclosed in more recent editions of the regular Fit to Speak, I worked for both production companies in the control room for 11 years, both RTTV America Incorporated and TNR Productions, of which RT was the client. Al Jazeera has been able to shed the image it had of being nothing more than a propaganda outfit. I don't hear anybody complaining these days about propaganda when watching Al Jazeera. The same cannot be said about RT in its 12-year existence in the States. Now, contrary to somewhat popular belief, RT America, in most cases, I wouldn't say all cases, but in most cases, had some good programming, had some good hosts, even exceptional hosts and correspondents, some of whom sadly are no longer with us. But by any journalistic standards, some of the output, not all, but good amounts of the output pertaining to Russian President Vladimir Putin, his invasion of Ukraine, and doping, among other topics, was worse in the neighborhood of make-believe. Some of it certainly made Adam Kokesh look like a Rhodes Scholar. With RT's bias and ties to the Russian government, such that it is, the thing to look at is essentially, as bad as that may be, as bad as that may be, is that any worse than any other foreign media outlet or even advertiser funded media outlet? And what I think about, especially whenever I'm asked about this, is you've got to know the score. Okay, you've got to know the score, and the score is that RT presents the Russian perspective on these events. It blatantly says so on their live stream. It's why I'm entirely unsympathetic with those like Liz Wall, who infamously did this during her time at RT America.
And that is why personally I cannot be part of a network funded by the Russian government that whitewashes the actions of Putin. I'm proud to be an American and believe in disseminating the truth, and that is why, after this newscast, I'm resigning.
Wow.
What's the over-under that Putin was not exactly thrilled with Liz's pronunciation of his surname? I'll take the under on that one. The point I wanted to illustrate to my panel was that for some of these outlets here in the United States and abroad, it's easier to point out the flaws of others than it is to look in the mirror. Certainly making fun of RT, particularly RT America, was low-hanging fruit, and I do think that the network made that too easy in some cases, some of which is evidenced in this Atlantic article, even though there is, in certain parts, some elasticity with the truth. Nonetheless, we'll have the link in the YouTube description below so that you can judge for yourself. My verdict is that RT America was the equivalent of a Facebook relationship status. It's complicated. The truth about the network and its role in the media ecosystem is somewhere in the middle, in my judgment. It's neither the complete angel that some make it out to be, nor the devil that some make it out to be. And dare I say that it may perhaps be remembered like that Bennifer movie of the early 2000s. In all seriousness, I do find Fox, One American News, Candace Owens, and others of their ilk to be a significantly greater cancer to our society. And I also find that the actions of former CNN head honcho Jeff Zucker and former CBS head Les Moonves in running wall-to-wall coverage of Trump's speeches and taking them live to have played a greater role in electing the twice impeached U.S. president than anything that RT could have done. I'd strongly advise anyone watching this program to watch the movie Control Room. Although this was made in the context of Al Jazeera, I think if you swap that out with RT, you'll note the parallels. Now, going to Metro, independent folks like Unsuck DC Metro, Fixwamada, and other critics deserve to be lauded for their critique of Metro, a system that to this day remains filled with problems. The beauty about them is that they're not bought. They're not encumbered with having to maintain access to Metro lackeys, which is why I was disappointed 2 years ago to see the energy spent by DCists and Washingtonian on articles like these. Metro's failures need to be covered much more consistently with real journalism, not feelings and sure as hell not stenography. You see, the pro-transit weenies that criticize Unsuck and the other critics and those of us who actually like transit but want it to actually function, feelings are not going to solve Metrorail's problems. They really aren't. Sadly, Unsuck DC Metro passed away on July 17th. It was first announced by fellow Metro critic and the absolutely brilliant Fixwamada. Unsuck had a blog and became very prominent on Twitter over the past several years. Much of the public could count on Unsuck to hold Metro accountable and to be a listening ear whenever Metro fails, which is quite often. I say much of the public because the morons and snowflakes who dared criticize him, including those in the Beltway media like Andrew Bujon, who, by the way, as its senior editor, wrote the Washingtonian piece I mentioned earlier, and this obit on Unsuck, replete with a nice dash of pettiness and outrage. When I said as much on Twitter, your humble host was blocked. Yowza, such thin skin there you've got, it seems, Mr. Bijan. Must have touched a nerve. Perhaps deep down you know I'm right. Thank you, by the way, for proving my point. While Washingtonian preferred, as of the time of this recording, to focus on hard-hitting topics like Old Bay seasoning, sunflowers, and rats, Unsuck DC Metro built a better mousetrap and succeeded where much of the Beltway media have failed. And I suspect that those in that circle, including the likes, it seems, of Mr. Bijan, are jealous. Jealousy is not a very good look. So much of our industry, indeed, will do very well to take Unsuck's example of providing real Metro coverage, real stuff, not this feelings-based crap, not this whole stenography that some of you guys out there have been doing. Unsuck DC Metro, may he rest in peace, and may his memory be a blessing. His death is truly a real loss for the DMV. Brandon Clark, Metro's new sheriff in town, may be somebody who can finally solve Metro's issues, especially given that the extension of the Silver Line will supposedly open later this year, this after numerous delays. But given how John Cato, Richard Sarles, and Paul Wiedefeld performed, forgive me if I'm not exactly holding my breath. Next week on Fit to Speak from the Archives, we'll revisit the second part of our conversation about cancel culture. I hope you'll be able to join us. In the meantime, be sure to follow us on all of our social media accounts and be sure to check out our Substack and Patreon pages for exclusive content and to support all of the work that we do here. Finally, don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell on our YouTube channel so that you do not miss any of our episodes. Until next week, I'm Eugene Obah. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, the best things in life are worth saving.